Botley Road in Oxford will reopen in August this year. This has been confirmed and confidently stated by Network Rail, which I know will come as a huge relief to the residents who've had to live next to this work for 3 years. But an end is in sight, and it looks like this opening date can be achieved, as most of the difficult aspects were completed some time ago. Before we look ahead to the completion of the bridge, and what the main contractor Keir has been up to since my last update, I thought it's worth discussing some of the issues which have led to the project being delayed by 2 years. What started as a relatively straightforward bridge replacement quickly became a much more complicated task than Network Rail or Keir could have imagined. Not because of mismanagement or one major hurdle, but because of a series of complications that were only identified once work began. If this had been a standard bridge replacement, it perhaps would have been more straightforward. Network Rail had, however, made an agreement with Oxford City Council to increase the clearance under the bridge for standard height double-decker buses to pass underneath. The old bridge had a maximum clearance of 4.1 metres, although I believe it was also signposted at 4 metres. This meant that any double-decker buses which had to pass underneath the bridge had to be low-height buses, and even then had to be driven cautiously under the bridge. This meant that bus operators had to procure non-standard buses, and that the top deck was more cramped than a standard bus. Full-height double-decker buses are typically 4.4 metres tall, so the headroom difference is noticeable. Clearly, it would be difficult to justify replacing a bridge just to increase the clearance. But Network Rail were going to build a new bridge anyway, as part of the wider Oxfordshire Connect upgrade. This project will see the construction of a new through platform on the western side of the station, requiring the installation of a new track. The proximity of the bridge over Botley Road means that the new track would have to branch from the main line before crossing the road. This meant that a new bridge span was required. It wouldn't have been possible to simply build a new span, as the road begins to slope upwards after passing underneath the bridge. The clearance under any new span would therefore have been further reduced, likely precluding the use of double-decker buses altogether. The only option therefore was to construct a new bridge. In this instance, Network Rail is aiming to deliver several benefits at once, and has future-proofed the structure. The easternmost span, which is now in place, will initially be used as a walkway connecting the station car park to Oxford Station. It has, however, been designed so that it can support an additional railway track in future. This would be required if plans are taken forward to construct an additional through platform on the eastern side of the station. This may require the construction of a new footbridge in future, but building the bridge in this way does at least provide provision for future expansion of the station without needing to rebuild the main bridge. In addition to this, Network Rail is improving provision for pedestrians and cyclists, with the inclusion of 2 much wider shared cycle and footpaths. The paths run at a higher level than the carriageway, and what are almost like tunnels within which the paths run have been incorporated into the new abutments. The new abutments and bridge sections were built either in the station car park or off-site and then transported to the site by road. The bridge was fully assembled earlier this year during an 8-day closure of the railway. As the bridge replacement was taking place anyway, it made sense to improve the walkways and increase the clearance underneath the bridge. The difficulty arose as the only way to increase the clearance for buses was to lower and therefore excavate the carriageway. This is when the problems started. First of all, the utilities had to be diverted, which meant negotiating with several utility companies, who have a lot of control when it comes to deciding where the utility should run and timescales during which the work should take place. The process of diverting utilities can be expensive and time-consuming, and to a large extent the main contractor Keir and Network Rail are beholden to the utility companies. In defence, those companies would likely argue that they always comply with the rules and regulations set out by the government. After each utility company has decided on the route, they submit their costs to the project promoters, in this case Network Rail. Then, once the cost has been settled, the utility company instructs its preferred contractor to undertake the work. This means that even when things do run smoothly, the added layer of complexity that arises from having to deal with several companies can make what should be a straightforward project much more complicated. If you consider that 11 separate utilities were identified underneath Botley Road, one of which was a 600mm water main and another was a 400mm gas main, then I'm sure you can appreciate how complicated the situation quickly became. The 11 utilities identified were only those that were mapped and accounted for. Other cables, for which no one assumed responsibility, were also found. In such instances, it first has to be established if the cables are no longer live, before they can be safely removed. To do this, a process known as spiking is used, which quite literally involves pushing a spike in a controlled manner through the cable. The routing of a key water main was perhaps one of the more difficult challenges, requiring a great deal of negotiation with Thames Water before they settled on a final design for the route which they deemed acceptable. To further complicate matters, they were also in the process of replacing a section of pipe over Oseney Bridge, after the existing pipe suspended underneath the bridge was damaged. Further complications arose after a huge inverted Victorian arch was discovered during excavation. Network Rail knew about the structure beforehand, but the true extent of the arch was not fully documented. The purpose of the inverted arch was to stop the high water table from lifting the road, as the road dips to pass underneath the bridge. Therefore, Network Rail not only had to remove the arch, but also had to devise a solution that would replicate its function. To do this, Keir is currently forming a U-shaped concrete mass. This shape will push up against the abutments, and the sheer weight of the concrete mass will resist the upward pressure caused by the high water table. Within this footage captured in May, you should be able to see an orange waterproof membrane, and the first part of the concrete mass which had already been poured. The concrete towards the bottom of the footage is just an initial blinding layer upon which the mass will be formed. Once all of the sections have been poured, the mass will be covered by a final, thinner layer of concrete, before the asphalt road surface is applied. Due to the fact that the road is significantly lower than the surrounding ground level, it could run the risk of flooding during heavy rain. To stop this from happening, a huge 200,000 litre attenuation tank is being constructed. The tank is being constructed in a similar way to shafts which are used during tunnelling, which I've detailed in previous videos. This process involves excavating a cylindrical hole, which is supported by concrete ring sections. The rings are forced downwards by hydraulic rams. As the excavation deepens, the top of the rings meets the top of the hole. When it reaches this point, a new set of segments are installed to form another ring, and the process begins again. The purpose of the attenuation tank is to store rainwater collected during storm events. The water is then released at a steady rate into the existing stormwater system. This means that the existing system won't be overwhelmed when there is exceptionally heavy rainfall. I fully appreciate people's frustrations, as living next to a construction site for 3 years must at times have been unbearable. The closure of the road has also had an impact on businesses. I don't believe, however, it would be fair only to blame Network Rail or the contractors involved. The situation perhaps illustrates how difficult it can be to upgrade railways when there are so many stakeholders involved, and as details of many of the structures built during the railway construction boom simply were not fully documented. Once construction of the bridge is complete and the road reopened, Network Rail will move on to the next phase of the project. This will involve constructing the new through track, platform and western entrance. This phase of the Oxfordshire Connect scheme is being progressed, and Network Rail hopes that the new platform and entrance will be completed around 2028. Although some elements of the scheme have been cut back to reduce cost, such as the proposed green roof, and some retail spaces within the new entrance building. The scheme will, however, provide overall benefits, allowing more trains to operate and providing more capacity for passengers. I hope you found this video informative. If you have, then please don't forget to give it a like or a hype, as it helps my content to get noticed.